Wilson. I'm Dean of the School of Architecture at the Boston Architectural College. I want to welcome everyone here. As many of you know, the BAC began in 1889 as a place for open conversation for anyone interested in design. And tonight, we are so completely honored to have Dr. Sharon Egretta Sutton as our 29th Cascieri lecturer in the humanities. And the title of Dr. Sutton's lecture is Each One Inspire One, a battle cry for design activism, which for me is a culmination of the year-long lecture series in favor of exploring just space and what that means. I want to connect people to Arcangelo Cascieri, who was an immigrant and arrived as a small boy from Italy in Greater Boston. He then became a student at the BAC, and this is a drawing from 1926. He became an architectural ecclesiastical sculptor. You see him working on a relief here, in the round sculptures as well, critiquing students. One of the things students of his have told me is how much he encouraged them to push forward, to keep trying when they were getting discouraged. And he knew that he had confidence in them that they would succeed. And here he is bringing the family goat back from boarding over the long winter to his backyard in spring for his wife, Ada, and him to enjoy the company of. Each autumn, he would make a woodcut, a carving original holiday card and share that with the community. And many of you have seen this sculpture that he made a relief in our memorial library. Here he is standing with the then President Bernie Springer and business guru Elsie Hurst, who took care of all money matters. And this was in 1976, right after our mural was completed by muralist Richard Haas. And in pre-pandemic days, we would be gathered in a hall named after Arcangelo, and we hope to come together again. I want to hand the stage of Zoom over to President Mahesh Das, who was our 28th Cascieri lecturer in the humanities. And so I'm gonna end this and stop sharing. Great.
Thank you, Karen, for a great introduction about particularly Arcangelo Cascieri. And greetings to each of you, and welcome to the Boston Architectural College as an independent institution that welcomes students from around the globe. Our mission is to diversify the design professions by providing excellence in design education. So as Dean Nelson has just mentioned, you are joining our 29th lecture in the Cascieri Lectureship in the Humanities series, featuring my dear colleague and fellow ACSA Distinguished Professor, Dr. Sharon Egretta Sutton. Dr. Sutton is an activist educator and a public scholar. She currently serves as a distinguished visiting professor of architecture at Parsons School of Design. Her lecture is the concluding event in the BAC's 2021 series of events themed Just Space, curated by Dean Karen Nelson and our distinguished lecture committee members. All our Cascieri fellows are awarded a special medal on this, signifying this magnificent occasion. So the lecture, Each One Inspire One, a battle cry for design activism, seeks to deepen the anti-racism movement bubbling up within the design disciplines and fields. It attempts to link to incongruent trajectories of her career, presenting a theory from her forthcoming book, The Pedagogy of Hope, Pursuing Democracy's Promise through Place-Based Activism, that posits how disenfranchised Black, Indigenous, and people of color, particularly youth, develop a sense of agency by working hands-on really to heal the wounds in their ravaged neighborhoods. Dr. Sutton previously served on the faculties of Columbia University, Pratt University, University of Cincinnati, and University of Washington. Allow me to mention a few significant numbers in Dr. Sutton's life and career. Let me start with 12. Dr. Sutton was only the 12th African-American woman to be licensed in architecture in the United States. Number 5, the number of academic degrees she holds in architecture, music, philosophy, and psychology. 2, Dr. Sutton was the second African-American woman to be elevated to a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. 1, Dr. Sutton was the first African-American woman to be promoted to full professorship in architecture. To this, I will add one more number, if I may, and that is 2, number of birds Dr. Sutton adopted. If you listen closely during the lecture, you might get to hear the musical notes of parakeet Lady Day, named after the legendary singer Billie Holiday. The other bird who passed away was named Charlie, after bebop jazz musician Charlie Parker. In real life, Charlie Parker was nicknamed Yardbird and produced the album Ornithology Suite. There is a deeper significance to the names of the birds and Dr. Sutton's early life and career. So early in her career, Dr. Sutton was trained as a classical musician playing French horn. Before joining architecture school, she worked as a professional musician in New York City, most notably with the original cast of Man of La Mancha. If we cut a longitudinal section through the history of this country over the last 100 years, we see Dr. Sutton has not only been a witness to important social movements and moments for the last 8 decades, but also made contributions to transform the uneven landscape of design and social justice. In this regard, Dr. Sutton's scholarship explores America's continuing struggle for racial justice, as exemplified in her recent book, When Ivory Towers Were Black, a story about race in America's cities and universities. Dr. Sutton has been a keynote speaker at conferences in 5 disciplines and a distinguished lecturer and guest studio critic at more than 100 colleges and universities internationally. Dr. Sutton received the Whitney M. Young Jr. Award from the American Institute of Architects, the Medal of Honor from both the New York and Seattle chapters of that organization, and the Oculus Award from, in fact, my early career mentor, Beverly Willis's Beverly Willis Architecture Foundation. She is a distinguished professor of the Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture, which is the highest recognition for an architectural educator. She is an inductee into the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame. So please extend a warm BAC welcome to this year's Cascieri Fellow, Dr. Sharon Egretta Sutton. Dr. Sutton.
Okay. I'm very pleased to have been invited to do this lecture, to be the 29th on a list of 28 very distinguished people. I'm also delighted to be doing a lecture that is named for someone who took care of goats. Because not only did I have 2 birds, but I'm on my 5th Pekingese, so I'm a big animal lover. But I'm especially honored to be at a school whose values align with my own. in believing that education should be open and accessible to all. So I consider this a great opportunity to talk with this community about education, about the future of education, especially as it relates to racial justice. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. Everybody can see? Okay, great. All right. My work as an architect and educator has been inspired by 9 high school students who faced racial terrorism when they volunteered to integrate Little Rock Central High School in 1957, when I was their same age. Their bravery influenced the trajectory of my career that seeks to amplify the voices of low-income youth of color who have been in the trenches working to heal the wounds of racism. Their bravery also influenced a very separate trajectory that navigates a slippery slope between helping already advantaged students achieve mainstream success while encouraging their sense of agency to disrupt the status quo of white privilege. This work has proceeded along 2 separate and incongruent trajectories, presented in separate lectures for different purposes and to different audiences, separately until this evening. Having finally attained the bravery of the Little Rock Nine in my 9th decade, this premiere performance attempts to link these incongruent trajectories. By seizing the moment offered by this distinguished lectureship, I plan to use my own inspiration as an activist, architect, and educator to inspire agency among students at an institution that has worked to contribute to an open and inclusive society since its founding in 1889. Given Boston Architectural College's legacy of commitment to engaging across disciplines and its current representation of women and minority faculty and students, I picture this audience at the forefront of the national anti-racism movement that is bubbling up across the nation. So get ready to field my battle cry for decolonizing design education and practice. I begin with the first trajectory consisting of my work with youth in low-income communities, followed by the one consisting of my university teaching in professional programs around the country. Then I revealed the main event, showing that the trajectories are already linked and could be further integrated to synergize the recent anti-racism work in the design fields. I provide a brief analysis of why students in this school have a responsibility to assume leadership in the national conversation on decolonizing design, and I end by inviting you to join me in carrying forward Boston Architectural College's historical commitment to equity. My community trajectory began when I accepted a job as an architect in residence at the lowest achieving public school in Brooklyn, New York. The school, which featured an arts curriculum, was situated in a middle an upper middle class neighborhood where parents sent children to private schools but controlled the fate of the local public school. Because the neighbors believed that the school's Black and brown students needed law and order rather than art, the principal charged me with demonstrating their creativity. With funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, I addressed this charge by engaging fourth, fifth, and sixth graders in design build activities. During the first semester, about 100 children in 3 classes learned to design and represent three-dimensional space. To do their assignments, children and teachers had to work collaboratively as a team. During the second semester, the team designed and built a structure in the schoolyard. The first year, the neighbors called the police, thinking we were up to no good with our work tools. But by the second year, the neighbors volunteered and contributed money to the project. The project eventually evolved over 1,000 children, teachers, parents, and neighbors. The funding for materials in my residency during the first year coming from the National Endowment for the Arts. However, by the last year, the funding came entirely from parents and neighbors who doubled my residency hours and the construction budget. Meantime, the project became the subject of my doctoral dissertation in psychology. My empirical research demonstrating that the children who participated in the design build activities learned to be significantly more cooperative and environmentally aware than those who did not. After a short stint at the University of Cincinnati, I accepted a position at the University of Michigan, where I received a W.K. Kellogg Fellowship to study leadership that required me to increase the social justice focus. Oh dear, okay, wait a minute. There we are, having trouble changing slides. The social justice focus of my youth work. With additional funding from the Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts, I conceived the Urban Network, a program to help K-12 teachers engage children in activities similar to the ones I had done in Brooklyn. This national outreach program reoriented the methodology I had developed as an architect to teachers who lacked design expertise but wanted to engage their students in improving their deteriorated school surroundings. The Urban Network distributed instructional materials, made site visits, held competitions that my graduate students juried, documented projects for others to replicate, and offered teacher workshops in California, Hawaii, Taipei, and especially in Michigan, where the Kellogg Foundation is located, and in New York City, where arts education ranks high. With additional support from such groups as Henry Street Settlement, Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, and AIA New York, the Urban Network witnessed its most successful project on the Lower East Side of New York City, with sixth graders, teachers, parents, and volunteer architects transforming a concrete jungle into a lovely playground over a period of years. Another successful project occurred in Mexico City, supported by that nation's requirement that second-year university students earn community service credits. Through that requirement, the urban network placed an architecture student in residence at an elementary school doing work like what I had done in Brooklyn. In 1998, I left Michigan to join the faculty at the University of Washington, where I assumed leadership of the Center for Environment, Education, and Design Studies. Known as SEEDS, it brought together an interdisciplinary group of faculty and doctoral students to advance participatory research and design through partnerships with K-12 schools, government agencies, and grassroots organizations. Our most long-term partnership was with a suburban school district in Tukwila, which began with classroom activities and ended 5 years later in a community design build for an outdoor classroom. However, by that time, working with the public school system had become increasingly difficult as neoliberal theories of preparing children for the workforce took over and left no childs behind. So SEEDS began reorienting its work to after-school, community-based youth programs. One of those organizations was Brooklyn College Community Partnership, an after-school network that linked high school students with the college, and coincidentally was directed by the mother of 3 children who had participated in my Architects in Schools program. She asked SEEDS to coordinate a summer internship for high school students that would pair them with artists in order to redesign their space as a maker studio. SEEDS engaged the co-designers in all sorts of activities, from carpentry to laser printing, puzzle making, yoga, and outdoor picnicking. By the end of the internship, they had completed several design alternatives for the maker studio. SEEDS also received a grant from the Ford Foundation to conduct a national study of after-school programs for low-income and minority youth. My research team identified community-based programs in impoverished neighborhoods of 10 cities that engaged teenagers in such activities as creating gardens, painting murals, cleaning up rivers, building housing, and campaigning for better food and better schools. The research demonstrated that the most progressive programs emphasized social justice, helped youth be socially critical, and created opportunities for them to be community leaders. I am revisiting that work in the book I am currently writing, A Pedagogy of Hope. The trajectory that involves professional students in community design began after I achieved tenure and could take advantage of its protection to engage in this risky form of university teaching. Before that, the research center at my school received a request for assistance in planning a Methodist church in the village of Dexter, where I lived. The minister explained that the congregation had hired an architect to develop plans for expanding its existing facility. But in a fundraising drive, the plans failed to inspire a single pledge. When a former Boy Scouts campsite came up for sale, the church purchased it thinking that a property that many people remembered from their childhood would bring a sense of excitement to the expansion effort. Because the United Methodist Church recommends locating on highly visible sites along main roads, the Dexter congregation needed help planning their wooded site, which was along a back road. I took on the request and hired 3 research assistants who spent several months at meetings with congregants, helping them define a vision for what they eventually referred to as a house for the people of God. Instead of the usual monumental inward facing structure, their facility would be diminutive and face outward to the beauty of nature. At the ice cream social, where my research assistant presented drawings and a model of the congregant's vision, the church received pledges in the amount of $120,000. Although the building eventually turned out poorly, the project had long-lasting outcomes, as has been true for much of my community-based teaching. You see, last July, at the height of the George Floyd protests, I received a message from the minister of that church, whose son had given him one of my podcasts. He wrote, and this is a quote, "I have to tell you how much I appreciated your involvement in the planning for the church property. I still believe you were moving us in the right direction, and that the first proposals for a building there reflected your aesthetic. Involving your students in dreaming about the future was exciting." Personally, I have to say that after I left, they built a building which I feel did not make the most of that work. In many ways, it is a building which it could have been built in suburbia, almost anywhere, instead of something that uniquely responded to the site and the surroundings. He also informed me that his son, a high school student at the time of the research, had become a professor of architecture at a university in Philadelphia after spending a year in Africa with Architects for Humanity. As a professor, he established an outreach center that does design work for and with the people of Malawi, one of the world's poorest countries. So the seeds planted in the rural village of Dexter are bearing fruit of the trees in Philadelphia and the rural villages of Malawi. After achieving tenure in Michigan in 1987, I applied the method I had developed in the Dexter project to graduate studios focused in Detroit, where a rapid downward slide had just begun. Of course, none of my students were from Detroit, but rather came from the northern and eastern part of the state, where they likely never countered Black people, and certainly not a Black teacher. However, over the years, the students and I developed a process for working with many Detroit communities as the city became increasingly devastated. Detroit and the surrounding downriver towns did not have accurate planning maps, so our work began with surveys that we sometimes conducted from inside our cars and sometimes in protective gear inside toxic structures. One year, when Detroit had a particularly destructive Devil's Night, we erased 25% of the buildings that we had surveyed in September for the final presentation at the end of the semester. Many of our projects were adaptive reuse, which at that time was a little known construction method, except on the East Coast. Certainly, they were a hard sell to students who had learned that design involved creating anew. However, the area's magnificent collection of abandoned buildings captured their imagination, and soon many students came to see the constraints of an existing building as inspiration. Like the Dexter Ice Cream Social, presentations were community organizing events leading to the next stage of a project. Sometimes we brought our clients to the university, typically in the evening or on the weekend, which had the benefit of allowing other students to see what we were doing. However, oftentimes we followed best practice and presented on our clients' turf, which allowed community residents to attend and also attracted the press. Many of the studios were interdisciplinary, involving urban planning or landscape architecture, and the clients were typically nonprofit organizations, though sometimes they were downriver planning departments. At one point, a coalition of Detroit community groups served as the client for schools and colleges across the university that offered whatever services a particular community group needed. For example, if a group had a public health problem, a faculty member in the School of Public Health would step up and so forth. I was fortunate to begin this work at the University of Michigan, which has a tradition of service dating back to 1961, when President John F. Kennedy launched the Peace Corps there and challenged students to use their education to serve their country. During my tenure there, I was part of a university-wide group of faculty and students who worked with community leaders to define a pedagogy of intentionally integrating community service with academic learning. This work, which became a central feature of my research, was eventually formalized as the Ginsberg Center for Community Service Learning and the Michigan Journal of Community Service Learning, where I am a founding member of the editorial board. At the University of Washington, my community engaged teaching was twofold. Through Seeds, I convened many community design charrettes, some lasting just a day, and others a week or more, most involving numerous stakeholders and 50 or so students working in teams alongside faculty and practitioners. I served on the city's design commission and one of its design review boards, so many of the problems we addressed were being debated in those contexts. For example, when Seattle mandated increased density in some areas of the city, Seeds received a request from a group of volunteer planners for help in influencing the agency that would produce new design guidelines for its neighborhood business district. The volunteers wanted to preserve the area's small town quality with its centerpiece Olmsted Park and historic buildings. But they also were concerned about vehicular traffic and the convenient parking businesses required. Seeds accepted the project even though it would serve a middle income constituency, because the results would help inform debates about increased density in neighborhoods throughout the city. This 4-day charrette involved almost 100 participants and included an evening participatory design session at the university and a public forum at the local elementary school. Afterwards, the city used the design proposals as illustrations for design guidelines that increased density while maintaining a pedestrian scale. My other community engaged teaching at the University of Washington involved both undergraduate and graduate design studios that, like the charrettes, frequently addressed issues that were under public debate. For example, when Seattle was building a light rail system, one of the stations required demolition of an entire block nearby a beloved neighborhood park. Residents were meeting to discuss how the new development could enhance the park and replace the affordable housing that would be lost. My undergraduate students attended community meetings, built large models of the block, and developed proposals which they unveiled at the university. Then a community member trucked the models and drawings to the local Chamber of Commerce, where they remained on display for about a year while the city formalized new design guidelines for the neighborhood. Sometimes I partnered with Donald King Architects, Seattle's largest Black-owned firm, to create drawings for pro bono work that it was doing in the city's historically Black neighborhood. For example, my students explored the feasibility of turning an existing community center that served African American seniors into an intergenerational facility with housing, an increase in use that would require a zoning change and neighborhood approval. The students' proposals needed to show that the site's use could be increased without destroying the area's single-family character. My students collaborated with students at the School of Social Work who made us aware of a funding stream for aged-out foster youth. So accommodating that population, along with seniors and families, became a feature of their housing concept. The students wrote a program for the expansion and developed several alternative designs, but it was the program that proved useful in winning a $100,000 planning grant to secure professional services. I organization in raising funds for an international leadership academy in Ethiopia, a country with low educational attainment and high environmental degradation. In response to the client's commitment to developing students as global citizens, graduate students in architecture and education teamed up to create a program that included distinctive classroom spaces, a dormitory, and outdoor spaces for habitat conservation, and that met 4 sets of accreditation requirements. The programming took place in the summer, with the design work occurring in the fall. As with the Intergenerational Center, the most useful outcome for the client's fundraising was the programming document. Now that you understand my two separate and incongruent trajectories, let's put them together in a new and exciting way. In truth, they have been linked all along by my teaching philosophy, which is anchored in the work of Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator whom I first encountered in doctoral school and who became the guide for my academic career. Freire appealed to me because he rejected the banking concept of education that considers students to be passive collectors of information. In his seminal book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he condemned education that prepares students to accept injustice, asserting that, and I quote, knowledge emerges only through invention and reinvention, through the restless, impatient, continuing, hopeful inquiry human beings pursue in the world, with the world, and with each other. End of quote. Okay, no, I was right. In critical pedagogy, creates classrooms where learning is student-led, collaborative, and project-based, and where students are tasked with recognizing and developing the confidence to transform injustice. Over the years, I have noticed that students in my academic track frequently struggle with this task, unable to perceive injustice from their position of privilege, while those in the community trajectory excel in it as their everyday lives are filled with injustice. In the movement to decolonize the design fields, at least two other activist organizations seem to have noticed the same phenomenon. One being the Design as Protest Collective, or DAP, a coalition of designers led by the New Orleans architect Brian Seeley Jr. The organization formed last summer as the streets filled with protests and the news filled with reports about the effect of racism in America, especially the inequities in housing and green space that made Black and Brown communities disproportionately vulnerable to COVID-19 and climate change. DAP champions reparations through design and has issued a list of demands, including defunding the police, ending CPTED, or crime prevention through environmental design, which they see as surveillance, um, community-controlled neighborhoods, and ending the high rate of incarceration. Among the organization's several campaigns is one inviting after-school youth programs to join the collective. These design activists recognize that the teenagers who live in the communities they want to transform have much to offer. The other organization, Black Space, started long before the summer protests and is a coalition of young professionals who challenge architects, planners, urban designers, architects, artists, and curators of built spaces to unlearn traditional values and rethink practice. Black Space has created a manifesto on design and community building, and a key leader in its implementation is Peter Robinson, who uses his architecture and planning studios at Cornell University as a Black space laboratory. For example, in October, I participated in a remarkable mid-review of a collaboration between Robinson's Cornell students and teenagers at the Medgar Evers College Preparatory School to explore and enhance the experiences of young Black men in their neighborhoods. One team imagined reclaiming basement spaces throughout the city for quiet and active recreation. And other teams presented equally compelling ideas for improving young Black men's urban experiences. At the end of the review, both the university students and the teenagers declared that their collaboration had changed their view of what is architecture and planning. Robinson has funding to continue the collaboration, not to create a so-called pipeline into the professions, but to transform their meaning and purpose. But you ask, what does this long story have to do with us here at Boston Architectural College? Don't you know that our education merges professional employment with academic coursework? Don't you know that we are practically guaranteed jobs in the design field of our choice on the day we graduate? Why should we be concerned with transforming what works so well? My response is, look around to see who is not in the room. They are the teammates you need to reach your goal of, and I'm quoting from the School of Architecture's website here, bringing together diverse identities and backgrounds in a meaningful dialogue to critique and transform the world, end of quote, which is actually the specific goal of critical pedagogy. Unsurprisingly, the School of Landscape Architecture seems to be on the forefront of finding teammates who are not in the room. Now, it's very scary to start talking about a school where you've never been. I'm working totally from the website and your Twitter feed, and I recognize full well that everything about you is not in those formats. However, I'm feeling very bold tonight, so I'm just going to forge ahead and say the School of Landscape Architecture seems to be on the forefront of finding teammates who are not in the room, with programs that are fully embedded in the life of the city, including in Roxbury, and with students who are fully aware of their responsibilities to society. However, given the advantages that you have of an almost guaranteed job after graduation, and that a $50 application fee guaranteed your admission to this school, given those advantages, I challenge you to turn up the heat. For example, you might connect with community youth programs like Youth Build Boston that empowers underserved youth to enter the construction trades, or the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative Youth Program that cultivates a rising generation of leaders, or the Food Project that involves youth in contributing to a sustainable food system, or the Asian Voices of Organized Youth for Community Empowerment that involves low-income immigrant youth in placemaking through dialogue and storytelling, just to name a few of the teammates you might invite into the room. In 1991, I issued a call for transforming the meaning and purpose of architecture in an essay entitled Finding My Voice in the Dominant Key that appeared in Jack Travis's groundbreaking book, African American Architects. Here's what I wrote 3 decades ago. Even though, as an academic, I am immersed in the dominant voice's view of power, authority, success, fairness, justice, human ability, and so forth, I feel an urgency to establish an alternative worldview, to question dominant values, although they are, if not perfectly, sustaining me, and to seek an alternative praxis of architecture. End of quote. With that, I urged my sisters and brothers to focus upon getting into the box while simultaneously trying to change it. I urged that they work with one hand to achieve power and authority within the traditions of the dominant culture, and with the other hand to achieve the meaning and social purpose that I found lacking in mainstream practice. Given your privileged position of an almost guaranteed employment, my call to you tonight is to use both hands to change the box. Today, the nation is in the throes of multiple crises, including the COVID-19 pandemic that has affected the entire world in unprecedented ways, the climate crisis that is threatening our very existence on the planet, and the ever-increasing concentration of wealth and power that has made the United States the leader in income inequality among developed nations, to leave unmentioned our current political divisiveness. However, the crisis that has upended the design fields is the racial crisis and the realization among designers that structural inequalities are created in and reinforced by the material world. This is a new awakening that you, as aspiring designers, cannot ignore. People who are 30 years old and under have led social movements worldwide, including the liberation movement in Cuba, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and the civil rights movement in this nation that was catalyzed by the courage of the Little Rock Nine and other Black and white youth who risked racial terrorism in the rural South to campaign for justice. Young people, especially Black and brown young people, are essential to disrupting the status quo because white people are invested in maintaining their invisible privileges at the top of the social order, as James Baldwin observed many years ago in his book, The Fire Next Time, and Isabel Wilkinson recently affirmed in her book, Caste. I believe that today's multiple crises call for a new generation of designers who have the courage to go out and find the Black and brown talent that is missing from this room and others like it. Together, you can engage in meaningful dialogue to critique and transform this unjust world into the open and inclusive society that Boston Architectural College has sought to create since its founding. Again, Thank you for this opportunity and for listening to my battle cry for design activism. Thank you very much. Now what happens?
Well, first, Dr. Sutton, I'm just completely taken, and there is, in your battle cry, there is much to talk. I mean, the perspective that you have provided, the depth of time, the depth of the matter, the length of the fault lines, and I mean, it is astounding and it is inspiring at once. And I think I know that our community has been and is ready to heed that battle cry. And that's our mission. And I think there is definitely much, much more work to be done. Um, and obviously, whatever little contributions we can make at the Boston Architectural College, we are intensely looking at, reflecting, examining, and building or unbuilding structures of oppression, if you will, and building structures that enable space for justice. And so it is absolutely inspiring, and thank you so much for those words, those experiences. And we are particularly honored that you have actually taken time to to look through and look into virtually, although physically it has not been possible, into the corners of our college and our community to make those kind and insightful observations. And we certainly heed that battle cry, ready to stand and walk the walk and fight the fight as needed. So I really appreciate that. I think there is much to be talked about, much to ponder. So let us open up this space now for reflections, comments, questions, and discussion.
I should be looking into the chat to figure out.
We will keep an eye on the chat, and any questions we will read it out. So please feel free to stay focused on anything you hear and see. But we will make sure the questions will be read. So I think
I think the biggest discovery for me in finding out about BAC was this statement of mission on the School of Architecture website, which is precisely critical pedagogy. It's exactly it. So I think I really am convinced that this is the place that should lead the change.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of questions. One is about how do we engage high school students? And let's maybe start there, and we can take other questions as well.
Well, you know, I usually have presented this work to people who are interested in this pipeline. Oh, we'll put these students in the pipeline. And I think that's the wrong approach. That you have to look at them as partners who are bringing something to the table that you don't have. They have experiences that you do not have. They are not here to get into a pipeline. That's a very mechanistic way of thinking about human beings. Boston is actually filled with a number of very interesting, the 4 that I gave out were actually part of the Ford Foundation study that I mentioned to you. So they happen to be programs that I'm familiar with, and they're really outstanding programs. But there are other programs in Boston, and you really should look for community-based programs that have a long track record in attracting older youth of color, because they don't mess around with programs that are, they're just not going to spend their time if it's not a program that's about social justice. So you will find those programs in Boston, and I'm happy to scout around because I have a lot of networks. But the four I gave you are ones that I know
Yes.
from my own research.
Yes, absolutely. And wanted to also mention that Dr. Sutton, that BSE is a founding institution of the Boston Arts Academy, which is dedicated to really bringing students from underprivileged backgrounds and neighborhoods and put them on the path of arts and design and architecture education. So that is one way we are doing, and we are also partnering with school districts to reach into, in fact, pre-K through 12 partnerships are part of our strategy and vision as well. But I think the organizations that you mentioned, absolutely. I wonder if we work with some of those already that I might not be aware of myself.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, but that's a great place to also begin. We have so let's see what other questions there might be. And there are some comments certainly, and I'm happy to read them, but also would like to see if there are any other questions to answer. And I think there was a, yeah, go ahead. Somebody. Yeah. I am sure there is much to ponder and much to process, uh, without a doubt. And so let's read a comment that came this way. One comment from Tyrone is, I'm from Jamaica and we preach diversity as out of many, one people. This is another way to bring forth unity across all landmarks and the world, in the world, and definitely America. So that's one comment. And another comment was from Emika, and the comment is, love the projects you talked about, Dr. Sutton, especially in Ethiopia, mostly because I was born there as a foreigner and I have seen the hardship for myself. And we have to strive to tackle issues such as this. Can you elaborate more about the project? Where was it located exactly?
Oh my God, that was a long time ago. I don't remember where exactly. I remember that we started the programming without having a specific site. So, and then we had a lot of trouble getting the site and getting the GIS drawings for it. But the idea was a school that would develop it would be a wraparound school for emotional, social, intellectual development of students, specifically around the environment. So the relationships that we were making with the outdoor environment and with places for working outside were very important.
And
I
another
see
question.
I see a really interesting question here. What was your main driver for working in social justice? I'd love to talk about that. Well, I was the exact age of the Little Rock Nine, and I lived at the time in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is known as the Gateway to the South, because it's a stop along the route going north or going south, but also because it practiced many of the segregationist Jim Crow laws that were practiced in the South. So I grew up in a segregated neighborhood. I couldn't go to the community center in my neighborhood. So that started it. But then I had this, I had all of these privileges because I went to a college preparatory school that was entry by examination. And so I got a very good high school education at that school, which gave me, I call it my football scholarship to New York, was playing the French horn. I learned to play the French horn at that school because you had to do one of the arts. It was a classical education. I have a monotone voice. I couldn't be in the choir. I told the art teacher he had to clean his room, so I couldn't take art, so I had to take instrumental music. And that got me to New York City. And just realizing the privilege told me that I had something to give back. So I feel very strongly in, paying it back. Which was my message to you, that you have gotten an advantage that is unusual in this day and age, and you have to pay it back. So I got interested in social justice because of the privileges I got by having that wonderful high school education.
Dr. Sutton, a question from Octavia, I believe I'm reading. Yes. How do you suggest existing institutions continue to adapt in the efforts towards social justice when they may not have underrepresented members in their community? Going back to your points on reintroducing alternative perspectives or design for students or professionals, used to a certain way of practicing or thinking.
So what do you do if you don't have a diverse school and you want to change? Well, you have to figure out how to do it. I'll tell you how Michigan did it, because there was a big blowout there when I first moved there, in which Black faculty and students went on the radio live and testified about their experiences of racism on the campus. And the legislature said, change this or else. And so one president quit, another president came in and just broke all the rules and decided that the easiest way to change the university was not in the schools, it was in the dormitories, because there weren't faculty protecting turf in the dormitories. And so started doing all of the multicultural work in the dormitories. And in about a year, had doubled the number of Black faculty in atypical positions. I mean, you have to break the rules if the rules don't work for you. So how you do it is to not follow the rules. You have to figure out a way to create different rules and to bring other people into your community.
Great, thank you. And the next question is from Alexandra, and the question is, when hearing a conversation between Grace Lee Boggs and Angela Davis the other day, Grace mentions how in the 1950s, Einstein said that imagination is more important than education. Could you elaborate and bring to life the ways in which you imagine both architectural pedagogy and the profession itself as fields decolonized from current systems of oppression?
Imagination If you can't, if you don't have a dream, how are you going to make a dream come true? That is my motto from a Broadway musical, Mame. You have to be able to think something different. And I think that's where designers, architects, curators of the built environment have much to contribute, is to imagine a different world than the one that we're living in. A world where housing is not a commodity that people have to spend 50% of their income and don't have money for food or for education. We have to imagine a different kind of world, and that's our specialty. I think that's why architects and designers and planners and curators of the built environment are so important and have so much to offer, is that we're in the business of imagining a different world. And the one we have is not working for people. And it has to be a world in which the exchange is not always based on money, that it's based on other things that you have to exchange. You have your creativity to exchange. You have your productivity to exchange. Everything is not about buying stuff. This conversation, Grace Lee Boggs is dead. She lived to be 100. I'm hoping to keep up with her. So this must have been an old tape that you saw. But she's one of my favorite people. Actually, my new book is very much, it's based on Frary and Boggs. It's a combination of looking at critical pedagogy in place, which Grace Lee Boggs really talks about, centering change within place-based change. So a person that I feel deeply sympathetic with.
Great. And I know that there are a lot of comments and compliments and thanks and all of that in the chat, which we will be sure to forward to Dr. Sutton. So please do not hesitate to put those in the chat and or ask for the questions.
Well, I have to tell you that when I accepted this invite, I thought that my book would be finished and that I would be using this lecture to get myself to my next frontier of work. And as it turns out, I've gotten 2 extensions on the book and it's not finished yet. But it's been very helpful to think about how these 2 things link together, because that is going to be my next area, the thing that I'm talking to you about, of having a different relationship with high school students that's not the pipeline relationship, is the thing that I'm going to be personally working on. So I'll look forward to seeing what you do.
Yeah, great. And I think we have a hand raised by James Carr. So James, please go ahead.
Hi, it's nice to hear your talk. I think it's fantastic. You're raising a lot of issues that have been, on my mind lately, about this question of a different idea from the usual pipeline idea. And I think it's so critical. We've seen 50 years. I mean, I'm old enough now to say, we've seen 50 years of architecture trying to use this pipeline approach, and the numbers of professionals haven't budged. In fact, maybe they've even gone down a little bit. And so it's really the wrong approach, I think, and I think you're right on the money with that. And my question, I guess, is, doesn't this really require thinking about it at the biggest level? And saying this at the BAC, which is an institution of education, I think is a challenge, but we have to start, I think, thinking about the building industry in a more holistic way, so that we're not only thinking of architects as highly trained people with master's degrees who have professional certifications and licenses where the bar keeps getting raised, the expense of getting there keeps getting higher, and the exclusionary elements of that keep getting greater. And even the BAC, which has a noble mission, plays its part in keeping people out through all of these hurdles. And meanwhile, in the trades, you have people from all different backgrounds and all different ethnicities and even genders now in the trades. How can we bring those people into the system of what we think of as architecture and have it be more of an equitable production?
You know, I think the idea that there's only one kind of architect is so stupid. I mean, you know, there are many different kinds of nurses. Many, from a nurse's aide to a psychiatric nurse to a surgical nurse. I mean, you know, why can't we be more inclusive? We have this idea that there is one architect, and people will just go on their sword for that. It's a very exclusionary idea. And maybe the root is to go, you know, look at the construction trades that are more diverse. But I would be for going, you know, there was a piece, an op-ed piece that I was very surprised that Architect published about a month ago that was a very strong argument for getting rid of licensure. And it's happened before. You know, it happened back in the what was the era that came before the progressive era? I've forgotten now. But, you know, there was a period in American history where people said, you know, all of this licensure stuff is just exclusionary. Let's get rid of it. I think there's a time and a place for licensing certain kinds of things, but we've applied it in such a broad way, exclusionary way, that it's not helping people. That the people, you know, if you think about all of the problems that need to be solved, that aren't being solved because you have to be licensed to do this, it's not making sense. And we're the, you know, we are the change we're talking about.
Yep, well said. And thank you, Dr. Sutton, for that. And I think we have a question from Christina.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Sutton. I really enjoyed your talk. I'm a 1990 graduate from the BAC, and now I'm on the alumni council. And when I went to the school was primarily white men. There were women in the interior architecture program. When I went to the meals for finals a couple of years ago to hand out meals, I almost started to cry because of the diversity of the student body, which I was so moved by the numbers of people from around the world and of all colors, all races. It was really extraordinary. But what I think about now is, since our students are to have internships at various places, how do we bring that same message to the firms that we, especially during this pandemic, how do we bring that same message that we need to hire these people, give them jobs, and be able to expand what I think the BAC is already doing, certainly so much better than in 1990. So that's my kind of thought and question.
Well, you know, it's so obvious that we need all the talent we can get. We need all of the perspectives that we can get. There are things that people know because of their experience that you need to have in these firms. You can't solve big problems. You know, I had, and I teach a housing seminar, and I have guests come in. And yesterday I had one of my former students come in who now works for Habitat for Humanity, who brought her boss and another coworker. They did a wonderful presentation. And one of my students could immediately see, I could see she wanted to work for Habitat for Humanity. So she was kind of pumping them for how they hire people. And what we found out, because she started out asking, what disciplines are you looking for? Kind of the obvious. And what we found out is that Habitat for Humanity, which is not what I thought it was before this class, I thought it was about brick and mortar. It's not. It's about the whole bundle of the commons and how you create education, employment, housing, food, and all of that you need for your life. They hire people that they like. They hire people that they want to work with, and they spend a really long time talking to them. It doesn't really matter what discipline they are. It matters who they are. So I think that we have to convince firms that they need to hire people and not skills. They need to hire the human being in order to design for human beings.
Wonderfully said. And we have 6 minutes, so we have time for a couple more questions, I'm sure. If you are waiting, now would be a good time to do that.
Unaware of how to raise my hand.
I'm sorry, who did?
Sorry, it's Christian. I didn't have. I can't raise my hand. Can I just jump in?
Yeah, please.
Oh, sure. So I'm a very non-traditional student. I started out an architectural degree back in the 80s, and I'm finishing it now at the BAC. And the difference.
Where did you start?
Wentworth Institute of Technology in Boston. The difference in the student body is from the 80s to now is unbelievable. It was mostly male and white back then. And now the mixture of women and minorities it's just completely different. So I feel like we've made some progress anyway. But so when I started in high school, I had a drafting class, which was in an industrial arts program. I grew up in New Hampshire, and I recently spoke with somebody in Boston that works in various communities. In Dorchester, I was working on housing projects in Boston in sort of lower income areas, and I ended up speaking with somebody, and he told me that there's only one high school in the city that has an industrial arts program. Yeah. So that first introduction to architecture through drafting just won't happen unless you've already decided that's what you're going to do. Right. It just seems crazy that like people don't have that exposure.
Well, it's this no child's behind left problem that everything is now oriented to preparing people for making the most money they can possibly make, and that's leaving out a lot of people. I think possibly what's going to change this all is that education is on such a bad route that it's just going to self-destruct. But the idea that education has been totally focused on job training, and job training for the most lucrative jobs. And so forget about art, forget about music, forget about, woodworking, sewing, or whatever, that enriches young people's lives and gives them another way of thinking. They all have to go into science and technology, and it's not for everybody.
I mean, the industrial arts program has always been a little bit like not looked upon as like, the highest level of, but I would have never become an architect if I had not had that first class. If it had not been in my school, I would have not gone to a specific school to get those classes. I just feel like we're not, I mean, obviously, I mean, the programs that you're doing are just incredible, like introducing people to design, even just beyond simple drafting. But it seems like those kinds of programs should be like the basic curriculum. This should not be like an extra special thing, you know?
Well, as I said in my lecture, I gave up on the public school system. It just was not possible to do creative work within the public school system. So I went outside of the public school system. And that's a shame to say, because I really believe in public education, but it's been co-opted. It's all about being able to pass tests.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Christian.
much.
And absolutely, thank you for that. And next, let me turn to our trustee, Valerie Fletcher. Then I'll go to Rich.
Thank you, Mahesh. Dr. Sutton, this has been an extraordinary evening, absolutely extraordinary. You're a brave woman and you are persistent. And that is a gift to hear about that. And I hear in everything that you've said, a respect for two things that we don't cultivate enough. And it is a respect for risk and a respect for vulnerability, which seem to be keys to doing this work for real. Can you speak to that? Thank you.
Vulnerability. Yeah. I think I'm very grateful that I began my life as a musician, and a musician that played an instrument that made you totally vulnerable. Because yeah, I think you have to be willing to share your weaknesses, and to be empathic with other people's weaknesses. And maybe that's one of the good things that has come out of this incredible thing that we've gone through with the pandemic, is people being in their homes and realizing, you know, the people that they are dependent upon to bring their food, to take care of people in the hospitals, and feeling our own vulnerability to this disease.
Opens new doors.
It opens new doors, because you can't live in fear. You have to live in peace.
And control is not the aspiration that we should hold on to.
Right.
Thank you. Your lecture has been a great gift and opened many doors.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you, Valerie. And Rich, I think we are at 7:30, but I'm going to say, Rich, you get the last question.
Thank you so much. Quickly, I'll just say that this year has changed the way I think about design and thinking about design. Your talk has been a very big ingredient in this as I think of the way forward. And you teased it a little, you mentioned it. Post-book, you have another trajectory, you have another horizon. What is it?
Well,
I want to go to there.
Yeah, it's really what I put out in the lecture, that, you know, I've had this schizophrenic life, that I've done work with youth and then I've done my university work, and that the two things have not fit together. And I want to fit them together. So that is going to be the next frontier, is figuring out how the youth work fits together with the university work, and in what format. All the questions people are asking me are, you know, it's what I'm asking myself. You know, how do we how do we change a field that is imprisoned by a licensure system that prevents it from being more diverse, when there's all of this talent in the world that could be solving real problems that we have right outside my door? You know, how can you use the fuel the full talent bank that we have, all of the young people who are interested in the material world? How can we bring those people together and get them to go forward? I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to work on it.
I can't wait to learn more.
Absolutely. And that's a wonderful note to conclude, wrap up our extraordinary event, memorable moment for all of us. I have no doubt that I think we know there is that work to do, and that really undoing the structural oppression and be able to build structures of justice and creating those spaces is the work ahead, and we will forge ahead. And I also know that this is certainly the first time that Dr. Sutton has addressed the BAC, but certainly not the last time. I assure that we will, and look forward to engaging Dr. Sutton, you in your work, and partner in our work together to make that difference. And so we appreciate, on behalf of all of us at the Boston Architectural College, our students, faculty, staff, alumni, partners, friends. We call ourselves the Great Banyan Tree of Boston, because we operate like that in an inclusive manner, and we work like a network, and we are a network. And so we look forward to many of those partnerships, and certainly reaching out to you for guidance, opportunities, and engagement with our community. And from all the comments, it is clearly evident, and we will forward those comments to you, that we love you, and we love your work, and we are grateful for what an extraordinary track record and extraordinary work, and certainly looking forward to more.
Well, and the dean has just given me the name for my next project: Partners Not Pipeline.
Certainly, that's our battle cry here. We talk about that. Ecosystems, not pipelines.
Yes.
And so thank you. And thank you all for joining us this evening. And we obviously have recorded, make it available through our platform. We look forward to seeing you at other events and forums that we convene. So have a great evening. And thank you again, Dr. Sutton. Let's
Thank
give
you.
her a
Thank
Thank
you.
you.